Ambassador Susan Rice. Welcome to Longer Tables.
Good to be with you, my brother.
You don't know how happy I am to have you, but especially how proud I am to get to know you over the years. And in a way, you've always been allowing a lot of people to join your dreams and your efforts. And I'm one more lucky person that was able to join your efforts in just trying to be successful. We're gonna go through some of those things. We're gonna be talking about the amazing White House food conference that you were able to put together, that we are just passing the 1 year mark. But also, we wanna know, I think everybody here in Longer Tables, we wanna know about not only about the ambassador, about the national security advisor, but about Susan Rice, the woman, the person. And because this is a show about food that celebrates who we are through food. You know, you grew up in Washington, D.C., you the daughter of two amazing individuals. I began reading more about them. Your parents, Emmett Rice. I mean, a Tuskegee Airman, a hero of heroes. I didn't know that about your dad. I understand now who you are. You have this in your DNA. I mean, your dad, became the second African American to be appointed to the Federal Reserve Board. Your mom, Lois Dickinson Rice, a trailblazing corporate executive, education policy expert. She is credited. She worked so hard in persuading Congress to create the Pell Grants. Oh my God, it's like, now I understand who you are, Susan, and how lucky we are that you got these amazing parents. So the obvious question growing up in Washington, what was your family dinner table? How was the conversation? What was going on in a normal day, or what was happening in Thanksgiving? This is what I want to know. What was the Rice table?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my family. You were kind enough to mention my parents. I'm the oldest of two, so you met my brother. He's about 2 years younger than me. And my parents were amazing professionals. They were each trailblazers in their own right. And they were wonderful parents, but they had a very unhappy marriage. And they ultimately divorced when I was about 10 and my brother was 8. So, I have sort of three dinner tables that are part of my childhood recollection, when we were all together as a family of 4, and then with my dad and me and my brother and my mom, and at times my stepfather and me and my brother. So about the food, my mom was an excellent cook, a really excellent cook. And she could be super creative, lamb and curries, and then she could also be super, utilitarian. She was a working mom. She was a professional from the time we were born. And every Saturday night, believe it or not, when we were kids, we had franks and beans, hot dogs and baked beans from B&M, which is a bean-making company in her hometown of Portland, Maine. So, literally, she'd open the can and throw on the hot dogs, and that would be Saturday night dinners. But we had lots of good dinners as well. They were, really quite well done. And my dad actually became a pretty good cook. He was particularly good with the grill and a steak man. And when my parents split up, and before the divorce, he really wasn't doing any of the cooking. And then he all of a sudden, had to feed 2 kids on a regular basis. So he learned his skills as well.
Your mom was a good influence in your dad in convincing him to cook more?
He had no choice. He had no choice.
He had no choice. Adaptation.
But my mom, I mentioned she was from Portland, Maine. And I remember not just her cooking well, but that of my grandmother, too. My grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side came from Jamaica to Portland, Maine as immigrants in 1912. And neither of them had any formal education.
That's why you mentioned cooking curries.
Well, but that was just one thing. But they did everything. But one thing I learned watching my mom, that is one of my favorite things to cook, believe it or not, is lobster, because of their growing up in Maine. So on special occasions, my grandfather was a janitor. That was his whole career. He worked until he was 80 years old, but he never walked out of the house without a suit on. And any time they had visitors from anywhere else, they would give them a lobster dinner. So that was a big tradition in my mom's family, and only special occasions, but something that I sort of watched and learned to cook from an early age. Same with Thanksgiving dinners. My mother blew Thanksgiving out, and was a crazy, wonderful turkey maker, sweet potatoes, beans, stuffing, everything. And so that's another meal I inherited from my mom. I'm always the Thanksgiving chef in our family. And meanwhile, my husband, now we can fast forward, my husband, Ian, whom I've been blessed to be married to for over 30 years, he's an excellent cook. And he is the one who does most of the cooking in our family. Not because I can't cook, but because he loves to do it. He got really good at it, especially when I was working like a fool in the government.
You've been busy. So you chose Ian because he's cooking?
No, I learned after I fell in love with him that he was a great cook. And he's gotten better, by the way.
My wife fell in love with me because my cooking. Even she didn't like to eat almost anything. You know what I appreciate, Susan, that you are sharing here in the open, your childhood growing up, your father, your mother. Myself, I only remember the amazing memories cooking at home. But life in my home sometimes was challenging. The way my mom was, even she was the most wonderful mom I could have, but that's why I always left home early. But I always remember the amazing memories, and the amazing memories were in the kitchen,
at the table,
making pie outside in the countryside, or in the table, because nobody ate happier than my mom and my dad. My mom, when she knew she was eating too much, she would begin laughing, because she was like, I'm eating too much, but I cannot stop. I'm like, Mommy, this is not good, okay? You have to be healthy. But thank you for sharing this, because sometimes I think when between us we are able to share experiences we had growing up, it's good to remember the amazing moments, but it's good that sometimes others know that you went through difficult moments, because that makes everybody believe that life is wonderful, but also has its challenges, and we're all together in these situations.
It's important. I mean, I wrote a memoir, as you know, Jose, back in 2019 called Tough Love, my story of the things worth fighting for. And I spent a lot of time talking about my family background, my grandparents on both sides, my parents, their divorce, and because all of those things shaped me so profoundly. I certainly, the good and the bad in me is, like everybody, a function of the influences that I had and the experiences I had growing up. So I thought that being open about that is important if you're trying to tell a true story.
So these two amazing accomplishments, Dad and Mom, cooking at home, the table. How were the conversations in that table?
Oh my God, we had the most robust, loud, some argumentative, politics, current events, debates at the dinner table. So that also shaped me, and that was.
No kidding. You are opinionated?
When my parents were together, and then also when they had separated, our dinner tables were robust discussions and debates. And when we got together with my extended family, same thing. My dad used to have a rule. Nobody will understand this who's under 50, but I'm going to say it anyway. If we made him miss the lead story on the nightly news because we were late coming out of school, or he had to pick us up from practice or whatever, we had hell to pay. Now, nobody knows what the nightly news is anymore. It comes on at 6:30 or 7 on CBS, ABC, or NBC. But back in the day, when I was growing up, that was the only real source of broadcast news. And you didn't have like the ability to record something and come back and watch it later. it happened live, and if you missed it, you missed it. So, and the lead story, of course, being the first story that began the nightly news, being the most important. So if we made my dad miss the nightly news and the lead story, he was pissed. But the reason why that was important is he was my mom, my dad, all of us were big consumers of information. We talked about what was going on in the world. When I was 4 years old, growing up here in Washington, D.C., in 1968, after Dr. King was assassinated, this city burned down. There were riots. There was, a huge outpouring of anger, as there were in many cities around the country. And my parents took me and my 2-year-old brother, he in a stroller and I walking, down the burnt-out 14th Street corridor to see and understand as best we could at that age something that was profound in our history. That's how they raised us. And they wanted us to see and to understand. My mother sat me down in the front of the television same year to watch Bobby Kennedy's casket come down in a train from New York City. So we talked about the events of the day. I got to be the one to break the news to my parents that Nixon had resigned. And that was a big story. We've been talking about Watergate and debating Watergate and, assessing its implications. And I happened to be the one that first heard the news and came running into the kitchen to tell them both that Nixon had resigned. So we had a household that was really not just steeped in the issues, but you had to have an opinion. You had to be able to hold your own. You had to be, willing to argue and debate. And if you couldn't hang, you weren't going to last long. So I think that's part of how, I'm not afraid of a debate or a discussion or even an argument if it's appropriate.
So you are making me have a flashback now, talking 1 second about my dad and mom. I always thought that they never had actually much influence in me in the same way you're describing your mom and your dad, especially your dad, in shaping the person you are today.
Both of them.
And both of them, but myself, I think I've been very unfair to my father and mother, because I remember it was always a Friday TV show on the second channel. We only had two, but that's in the second, that nobody was watching. It was always a movie, but it was a movie that was somehow had a political, social context. And after, at 1 a.m. in the morning, was few guests that they will discuss, inspired by the movie, but about whatever was the social political issue. And I was fascinated by it. And I have to thank my dad, because my mom will never let me be so late because I was fairly young. But my father was always the one that will go once my mom was in bed, knock on the door, bring me out, put the TV. So my God, I didn't even realize that my father was helping me do that. And it's funny how this can be shaping you as a young person in getting involved in understanding what's going on. It's amazing that your family, your parents were doing this. And I think now everybody listening on longer tables, we understand better and better why we have such an exceptional human being in politics as a leader. You were being shaped at such early age. That's how important it is to have the right parents just guiding us in that direction. Wow, I understand so much right now, even about who you are. It's just very impressive. You grew up in a very elite Washington in a way. What was like in here? I mean, you already described a few things of happenings growing up in the 70s, but anybody that you remember first time meeting that impressed you, that, oh my God, I'm meeting this person? Or any flashbacks you have of? I remember first time I saw Senator Patrick Moynihan in 1993. I remember first time I saw you and even I say hi. Or any flashbacks of things like this that you saw somebody like, wow? Because for me, I always wanted to come to Washington, D.C. because I will see the Hill and the White House. And I was fascinated by seeing the Hill and the White House in TV. And for me, I don't know, I was always attracted to Washington, D.C. in the distance. But you were here in the city of power.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Jose. I was fortunate. My parents had the means and they had the desire to try to give me the best, me and my brother, the best education that we could get. And in Washington, D.C. in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, sadly, but truthfully, that meant private schools. So I went to the National Cathedral School for girls. My brother went to the St. Albans School for boys. And they are, two of Washington's most elite private schools. And so I grew up going to school with the sons and daughters of senators and Congress people and ambassadors and Vice President Mondale's kids and Senator Ted Kennedy's kids and, Jesse Jackson's kids. I mean, the list goes on. And because of that, I got to go visit the United States Senate with one of my closest friends' father, who was a Republican senator from Tennessee, Bill Brock, an amazing man. And he, hosted our third grade class in his Senate office. And that's just one example of how, the business of Washington was something that I was fortunate enough to become familiar with very, very early. When I was in high school, I was able to intern in the House of Representatives. My dad, as you mentioned, was appointed and confirmed as a governor of the Federal Reserve. He was the second black governor of the Fed. And this was in the late 1970s. I got to go to the White House for his swearing in and hold the Bible and meet the Vice President and the President at the time, President Carter, Vice President Mondale. So I was super lucky to be able to not just read about stuff here, but learn about it and learn about the pain and the challenges. But it was such a different Washington back then, Jose, because things were actually often really not, no kidding, bipartisan. And it was in part, I'm convinced, because the families of people on both sides of the aisle knew each other as human beings because they lived here. They didn't sleep on a couch in their office or, go home every weekend. Even if they were in the House of Representatives, they moved their families here and they stayed here. It was a different time. There was no social media. Everything was a little bit slower, a lot slower. And people got to know each other. It's a lot harder to be really nasty and mean to somebody if you know them personally, and if you know the next day your kid's going to be on the playing field with their kid. And so it tempered things a bit. And so I have all kinds of really amazing memories. I remember when the Camp David Accord was signed, and the Egyptian embassy was across the street from my mother's house. And we had Secret Service on our roof, snipers protecting him. And I got to see Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian president, walk into the embassy and wave after signing Camp David. So I have lots of those kinds of historical memories that I'll always cherish. They were also inspirational in many ways.
So I've read that your parents said that race should never be an excuse or a crutch. That obviously this is a super complex topic, but right now, given what's going on and what's happening in the Supreme Court, I'm only curious about what are your personal feelings about affirmative action?
It's a complicated question, and I'm glad you asked. As a matter of policy, I favor affirmative action, and I think it's very misunderstood. Affirmative action doesn't mean, or didn't mean, that if you and I were both applying to the same college, and you had a GPA of 4.0 and I had a GPA of 3.5, then I'd get in and you wouldn't, if you were white. What it means is if you had a 3.5 and I had a 3.5 and we were almost the same, in terms of extracurriculars and recommendations and everything else, then I might get the edge. And I personally think that's fair. I also know it's fair that, I also think it's particularly fair that people who come from underserved backgrounds, it's not just race, it's from, Appalachia and rural America and, the first generation college students and immigrants and anybody who has not had all the privilege that frankly I had, would have the opportunity to have that be a consideration in their application. I think that's the right policy. But I'll also be honest with you, on a personal level, it was challenging for me. So let's rewind the tape, go back to, I'm a African-American student in 1982 at the National Cathedral School. The school was less than 10% black, very few Latinos, a few Asians, Indians, but basically a very white, very elite school. I was a good student. I was applying to all the top schools. I was an athlete. I was president of the student government. I had every hope, like my classmates, that I would apply to these top schools and maybe have a decent chance of getting in. By the way, many of them had parents who'd gone to these schools and they had the legacy benefit. Well, actually, so did I. Because my mother, long story, we haven't gotten into her history, her parents had no education. She got a scholarship to go to Radcliffe, now Harvard, and she was one of the first black women, to graduate from Harvard in 1954, then Radcliffe. So I had the opportunity to apply as a legacy, as did some of my classmates. But some of the parents of my classmates, not so much my classmates themselves, would say to their kids, don't worry about Susan. She's going to get into every school because she's black. And they said that, and then I heard that, and I knew that, and it was very infuriating and demoralizing. So what did I do? I said, well, can I curse on this?
Yeah.
Screw them. I'll just show them that I'm better than their kids anyway. I'm gonna do my damnedest to show what I can do. And so in a way it motivated me. On another level though, it really pissed me off. So when I graduated, there were at the top of my class, there were two of us who shared the distinction of being the top of our class. At my school was something called You Get the Flag. It's literally an American flag as the top academic award. I took great pride in that because what it meant was they couldn't say to their kid she got it just because she's black. So it's a complicated topic. I believe it's the right thing. But I also think, we can't teach our children to dislike their peers because of all of this stuff, because of affirmative action or legacy admissions. I don't want to resent the kid, whose parents went to Princeton if I didn't get into Princeton, and they did. So now we don't have affirmative action anymore, which I think is a huge setback for our country, but we still have legacy admissions. So privilege is compounded now.
Yeah. We complain about one, but we don't complain about the other. Do you ever remember if you kind of felt a sense of responsibility because your success could open the doors to success to other minorities, Afro-Americans or Latinos or whites from Appalachia?
Yeah.
Did you ever were conscious that the legacy of your mom and your dad and then yourself, you had this kind of
all the time.
consciousness?
That is still very much a motivator for me. Now let me tell the story of my mom in more depth. I mentioned that my mom grew up in Portland, Maine. Her mom and dad, as I said, emigrated from Jamaica with no education, came 1912 to Portland, Maine. You can imagine how few black people there were in Portland, Maine in 1912. There weren't none, but there were few. And my grandfather was a janitor, and my grandmother was a maid. And all they had was hard work and grit and faith and determination. And they saved and scrimped. They had 5 kids. My mother was the youngest of 5. She had 4 older brothers. My grandfather had not heard of scholarships at the time with the first couple kids. And so he borrowed from the bank, and he sent all 4 of his sons to Bowdoin College in Maine, which is a very nice private school in Maine. At the time, it was all boys. My grandfather was the first man to ever have 4 sons graduate from Bowdoin. And so they made him an honorary member of what would have been his college class of 1912. And the reason my mother had to go to Radcliffe is because Bowdoin didn't take women, and they had no idea what to do with a girl. So she got a scholarship to Radcliffe. She was almost denied it because she was black. And the theory was the scholarships were supposed to go to kids from Maine who were going to Radcliffe. And when the committee denied her the scholarship, they told her that the reason was the whole point of the scholarship was so that you could move in the proper social circles and come back and bring benefit to young girls from Maine. And since you were black, you're not going to move in the proper social circles, so there's no point in giving you the scholarship. Her debate coach at Portland High School and her principal worked a different angle directly with Harvard and got her some money so she could go. So my mom, who was, like all of us in our family, passionate about higher education. Her brothers, we had 2 doctors, we had 1 ophthalmologist, 1 college president, and then my mom. And all of them had benefited enormously from education. That's why her passion was the Pell Grant, which has enabled some 80 million Americans from low-income backgrounds of all races to be able to access higher education.
She's been called the mother of the Pell Grant.
She was the mother of the Pell Grant. And, you know.
Do we need to change the name?
No. Claiborne Pell was the father of the Pell Grant, okay. So we leave it Senator Pell. Anyway.
But we can add her name.
No, it's all good.
Okay.
But
you don't have to do it.
But the point is, Jose, both on my mom's side and my father's side, there's a great sense that, you know, you come from little and you try to make yourself a little bit better, and each generation tries to do a little better, and each generation has responsibility to give back. The more privilege you have, the more responsibility you have. And that was how I was raised. I knew that there were precious few black girls in Washington, D.C. in the 1960s and 1970s who had the privilege that I had. And that gave me a huge sense of responsibility to give back. It didn't mean that there was only one way to serve. It didn't mean I had to go into government or the military, but you know, my brother's work is same thing.
There's many ways to serve.
Yeah, he's built a nonprofit that's all about helping lower income individuals and low income people of color access professional opportunity. So we were raised with that sense of responsibility.
But then, obviously, learning about the Pell Grant and how instrumental your mom was in achieving these decades later, I'm only imagining that she's watching you somewhere from above because you were involved in the fight to forgive student loan debt. What do you think your mom will be thinking right now, thinking about that issue? And she had to be unbelievably proud of you. In a way, you are following her footsteps.
Well, it's interesting. My mom passed in January of 2017, right days before the end of the Obama administration. So she lived to see the work I did at the United Nations and in the White House as National Security Advisor, and before that on Africa. And she was an extraordinary supporter and source of encouragement and wisdom for me. But I don't think she would have guessed that I'd end up working as domestic policy advisor on many of the issues that she cared most about. So for the Pell Grant, for example, and President Biden committed during the campaign to work to double the size of the maximum Pell Grant, and we have already laid the foundation and increased it by over $900 over the last 2 years. The Pell Grant now is only a little less than $7,000. That's not nearly enough. Back in the day, 50 years ago, when it was created, that was a good share of the cost of college. So doubling that maximum grant is important, and that was something I was proud to get to work on as domestic policy advisor. Alleviating student debt, which is so burdensome for so many people, but particularly people who came from lower income backgrounds and people of color. It's deeply frustrating, and I think it was wrongly decided by the Supreme Court that they struck down the president's student debt forgiveness plan. But we at the same time have put in place new policies going forward so that it will be much less likely for people to accumulate in the future unsustainable debt. So that's a good thing that I'm super proud of. And meanwhile, Jose, despite the Supreme Court, millions of Americans have had their debt forgiven under President Biden because we finally fixed a public service loan forgiveness program so that if you've served in public service for at least 10 years, doesn't have to be consecutive. And by public service, it could be government, the military, but it could be if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're working for a nonprofit organization, if you're doing anything in the not-for-profit sector or government sector, you're eligible after 10 years to have your loans completely forgiven. The system was completely broken. We fixed it, and now it's working for people. And there are many other categories of people, permanently and totally disabled people, others who have had their loans forgiven. So we're going to stay on this. I know I say we. I'm not in the administration anymore, but I believe passionately in this. And all of us who do have to make it clear why that's the right thing to do.
I'm just going to pause 1 second. We have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
You have a hard stop, so I just
No,
want
we're
to
good.
give you a sense of
Okay.
how much time you have.
Time, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, these were clear. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Jose. I can probably do another
Definitely.
5 minutes.
Yeah,
if
well,
that,
Yeah,
extra.
you
if
might
that,
want to go to the
yeah.
But we're good. So for me, it was fascinating to see age 32 under President Clinton. I mean, you had to be one of the youngest ever Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs or any other position. But obviously your heart was in foreign affairs. And here we come under President Biden, and you occupy a role in the White House that was more about what's going on in America. Sometimes everybody in an administration, they serves at the will of the president. Was for you kind of a thought about, oh my God, my heart in a way, and that's what I feel because you've been ambassador to the United Nations and your early beginnings in administration about the world. But all of a sudden, you have to be dedicated about how do we improve America? Is the experience you gain in seeing the world as an ambassador of the United Nations and taking care and issues about Africa gave you ideas or experience that then is what made you become the successful President Biden on anything that had to do with how we're running America in the right way?
Yeah, well, let me answer both what did I learn in the experience question, but also, if as you would see, if you read my book, when I was growing up here in Washington, D.C., when I was in college, my passion was domestic stuff. That was where all my work was. I was, caring about income inequality and domestic violence against women and, all of these issues, because those were the issues that I was raised with. My dad as an economist had an international bent, but most of the work and most of the discussion around our dinner table was on domestic issues. And so I thought, and I wrote this at the time, when I was 10 years old, I decided I wanted to become a United States Senator from the District of Columbia. Well, I didn't become a United States Senator, and sadly, the District of Columbia still doesn't have full voting rights. But that gives you a sense of where I began. And then I had the extraordinary opportunity to spend 2 years it became almost 4 years, but to do my graduate degrees in England at Oxford. And I thought that I was going to come back and go to law school and then go into, public interest law of some sort. Think of me at, the Southern Poverty Law Center or someplace like that. That's sort of what I had in my mind. But I thought, okay, still hadn't given up, some interest in running for office at one day. So I said, let me use these 2 years to learn something I don't know anything about. Let me study international affairs. I'm going to the United Kingdom. It's a great vantage point for learning about the rest of the world. So I started studying international relations as a graduate student. And then I left Oxford, went and worked for a few years as a management consultant. And at the beginning of the Clinton administration, I got 2 job offers because I had worked in the prior presidential cycle on the Democratic presidential campaign. I got one offer to work on the National Economic Council and the other on the National Security Council. And I had no idea because I'd never worked in government before. But I just had this sort of probably unfounded hypothesis that it might be easier to switch from foreign policy to domestic policy than domestic policy to foreign policy. Somehow the foreign policy world just seemed harder to break into, more kind of, elitist and inaccessible. So I said, let me start on the foreign policy side. And so I did, and one thing led to another. I was a 28-year-old staffer at the National Security Council. Then I became an Assistant Secretary of State, as you mentioned, at 32. Then I became UN Ambassador. Then I became National Security Advisor, and I loved doing all of that work. And that just, one thing led to another, but it wasn't the plan.
It's almost like the dinner table in your home.
Yeah.
At the end, because you were addressing all the issues, you went in circles, touching everything,
And
national and international.
And I didn't go to law school, and I didn't become a senator, but I did do national security. And so when President Biden asked me to do domestic policy, I was like, yeah, this is going to be interesting. This is going to enable me to use the skills that I learned, negotiating at the United Nations, running the policy process as National Security Advisor, making the bureaucracy deliver results, and apply them to a whole new set of issues where I would be learning and I could contribute to something that I've always cared deeply about, which is the United States of America. So it was great, and I loved it, and I learned an enormous amount. I think we got a lot done that I'm quite proud of. And the skills I developed, and to some extent the knowledge I developed on the international side was very useful as domestic policy advisor.
So on food issues, obviously, all the things you've been telling us, you've seen food policy that yes, it's super important to me, and I know to you too, but you've been able to see it from 2 different vantage points. I mean, you as a diplomat, as a national security advisor, as domestic policy advisor to President Biden. At the end, what are the similarities or differences that you see about how we tackle food insecurity at home or abroad? Because it seems that food issues in America has nothing to do with what's happening in Haiti, or what's happening in Haiti seems nothing to do with what's happening in America. But how do we tackle food insecurity of what we learn overseas to bring it to America, or what we learn in America to bring it overseas?
I feel like I'm going to sound like José Andrés, but food is integral to everything else. You can't separate it. So if you're thinking internationally, we've got enormous challenges with hunger in parts of the world, particularly areas where there's conflict, and I've seen a lot of it firsthand myself, as you have. where there's drought, where there's bad governance, and you can't address the underlying causes of food insecurity without also addressing the precipitating factors, whether that's, resolving a conflict, getting rid of an authoritarian regime, or a non-state regime like in Somalia, which was using food as a weapon to starve its people. You got to get at the root causes, and the same is true here on the domestic side. You can't just, hand out food in a food bank and expect that you're going to address poverty and underlying food insecurity. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. As you know, you got to give people the skills and develop a local economy that is more sustainable. So a lot of the work that you do as you go around the country and the world feeding people in most in need, the brilliance of it is you're developing the local market and the local economy. You're not just dumping donations from the United States or philanthropy into the market. And so we got the similarities are you've got to build local indigenous capacity to produce that's sustainable, and you've got to build institutions that enable people to if they're in cities, to get jobs, sustain jobs, and be able to, feed their families.
So the White House Food Conference that you are celebrating the 1-year anniversary was something super important, because the previous White House Food Conference happened 50 years before. Few great things came out of that conference. And the idea of this conference, under the leadership of President Biden and you and the whole of the White House, was to try to keep moving food issues forward, to try to see what we've done well, what needs to be improved, what needs to be reinvented, or what new ideas we need to be bringing to the table. How do you see the successes and still the possibilities that White House Food Conference brought to the table as a way to make sure that food stops being the problem, but that food, we give it a chance to become part of the solution?
Well, first of all, you're too modest to say it, but Jose, you were, a driving force behind the concept and the success and the execution, and now the follow-up of that conference. And I want to thank you and give you enormous credit for that. You will remember that in the very early days of the Biden administration, we were on a Zoom. It was in the middle of COVID, and you were talking about the necessity of elevating this issue, and I was saying we agree and we were going to do something about it, and then we got the legislation and the funding. Thank you to Congressman McGovern and many others up there, but he's the OG, as I like to call him.
Before that, I remember, for some reason, then Vice President candidate Biden invited me to a round table. I call it a food hall. COVID times, nobody will be doing any public gathering. And I remember one of the first time that a candidate for president of the United States had a 1-hour town hall on food issues. This gave me a lot of joy, because it's like, okay, somebody is start giving some importance at a higher level to food.
Yeah.
So amazing what President Biden and you accomplished by giving a bigger voice to food issues, not like previous administrations didn't, but I have a feeling that we're bringing up the heat.
That was the hope. And just so people who know, what we did was, with your inspiration and support, we had this White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And this was end of last September 2022. And to coincide with the conference, we unveiled a national strategy on hunger, nutrition, and health, with the goal of ending hunger in the United States by 2030 and reducing diet-related diseases. And the national strategy and the focus of the conference were on the things that we had to do as a whole of society, not just the executive branch, not just Congress, not just states and localities, but the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, community organizations, everybody, to try to achieve these goals. And so we worked on everything from how do you make public spaces more accessible and amenable to exercise and recreation. And I should mention, Jose, you chair the co-chair the President's Council on Sports, Fitness,
And nutrition.
and Nutrition with Elena Deladon, the
Which is amazing.
Washington
And
Mystic
we have
star.
a great group of individuals from all parts of America joining forces and hopefully coming up of supporting administration with and the work you did with ideas that work.
So
but
that's-
yeah,
there's that,
you did
there's-
a lot of things,
yeah, it was-
expanding access to SNAP.
SNAP, and to utilizing Medicare and Medicaid to be
Food is health.
for food as health, food as medicine, meals as, as part of your health treatment plan, changing how we label our food so that, people can see on the front of the package whether there's good stuff in there or bad stuff in there. Working on changes to rules so that we reduce sodium and sugar content in foods while maintaining the quality and the taste. I mean, we did everything from research to government programs to galvanizing the private and nonprofit sectors who raised $8 billion in support of the goals of that conference. And there are just so many aspects of it that we did
The
together.
school meals expansion.
School meals.
To 9 million more children.
Summer EBT, as we call it, enhanced benefits transfer.
And
we got
still-
that enacted in law.
And those things are working, and hopefully over the year to year, the successes that and the ideas that came to fruition, thanks to this White House Food Conference, hopefully will inspire senators and congressmen and everybody else supporting those initiatives. So again, food becomes really a true agent of change. Me, I will even, as you know, be bolder. We announce that should never be a food desert ever again in America. With the will of the administration, the support of Congress, with the support of private sector, NGOs, we can achieve that. We are doing this show from DC Central Kitchen, one of my favorite NGOs in the world. I am emeritus chairman. This organization changed my view about how food can be an agent of change, empowering people through food to make sure nobody's hungry, that we don't waste food, that we empower people to be part of the communities. But food deserts is very important in what DC Central Kitchen does. We have healthy corners in places in Anacostia where there is no fresh fruits and vegetables. DC Central Kitchen shows up twice or 3 times a week to make sure that those Americans living in areas with no markets have access to those fresh fruits and vegetables.
It's critical.
Universal school lunch is unnegotiable at this point. Why? Because it should be. It's the best investment to America, not only feeding children, as we know, but creating jobs, training women and men to make good meals to our children, buying locally from farmers in rural areas that you can help poor areas. Actually, in the process of feeding the children, maybe invest in ways that, hey, we are injecting good money and help those economies move away from kind of in the edge of poverty. So we know it's many ideas, but obviously you cannot change the whole system overnight. But many of these things, I thank you for your amazing leadership on them, because thanks to them, I think America is moving in the right direction. More must be done. But you have to begin somewhere. And this was, I will not say a new beginning, because a lot of things were happening before, but this is moving the conversation of food to a new place, including, which I think you will be the perfect person.
I know where you're
I've
going.
been always asking that I do believe we need to have a national security food advisor. So the President of the United States is now sometimes blinded for things that happened before. and out of their control. Like, how do we run out of baby formula? Well, because the complexities of feeding the world are crazy. And sometimes things happen because somebody just forgot to take a look on what previous administration's decisions even were. Or why, as you know, we give food to a poor country, but we put the farmers out of business, out of doing good. We create sometimes some problems. So now we need to do a smart good. That's why I believe in the years to come, we need to have a national security food advisor that I think you will be the perfect person for the job.
Well, Jose, you're trying to get me back to work in government again. I don't know. We'll see. But you have had an idea, not just of a national security food advisor, but of a department.
Yes.
Of, I don't know, what do you call it, a food, or what do you call it?
Well,
What would you call it?
You know it.
And I'm skeptical of this
The
idea.
question I keep asking is, do we need to make the whole of a government? And you agree with me because you made it happen. I saw you making it happen. For me, used to see the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Health, you've been together. Well, you are already making the whole of a government working. But I think we need also urban housing development. And we need also the Department of Infrastructure. And we obviously need the Department of Education. Why? Because sometimes the complexities of government makes things slightly difficult, but sometimes if you bring 2 or 3 or 4 departments that we learn how to make them work together, maybe then we can solve some of the issues of food access to poor communities around America, because all of a sudden infrastructure and urban and housing development are working together. All of a sudden we have the federal land, we built a farmers market that is initially supported by the government, that then the private sector can come, that then food can flow freely from different parts of America into those places.
But that's the job that I was fortunate to have as domestic policy
Correct.
advisor. So the way people, this is what people don't always understand. When it's done right, the role of the White House policy councils, whether it's the National Security Council on Foreign Policy, National Security, or the Domestic Policy Council, or the National Economic Council, their job is to make sure that the relevant agencies are working together in a coordinated way. The food is a great example, or nutrition, health, hunger. These are not issues that can be resolved by 1 or 2 departments. Everybody's got to have an integrated, coordinated approach, and that national strategy that we produced was just that. It was the product of months and months and months of listening to people in the communities, hearing from people all over the country, but also of interagency policy coordination. So there's actions in there for almost every agency, from the Defense Department, to the Department of Education, and everybody in between. And so that's what's supposed to happen in terms of effective policy coordination. Sometimes it works better than others, frankly. And implementation is key. It's not good enough to put out a strategy. It's not good enough to have a summit or a conference. There has to be follow-on action and consistent attention to implementation. And I am confident that my colleagues are doing that.
But I'm very lucky because you gave me the opportunity to keep learning about how a government functions, how many amazing people work to make government work. Sometimes putting politics aside.
Yep.
Politics are politics, but at the end is, can we solve the problems Americans are facing? That has nothing to do sometimes with Republicans and Democrats.
And this
Hunger
is
is
a
not
classic
Republican.
issue. That's why I was so committed to ensuring that the conference and the policy was bipartisan. And we had, as you know, leading Republicans participate in the conference. Senator Braun of Indiana, and we had, sadly, until she passed, Congresswoman Jackie Walorski very much involved in the preparation, and others. And because
Amazing
it truly
leaders.
is a bipartisan issue, and now they're negotiating the Farm Bill, and that's going to have to be bipartisan. So,
So what I know is you agree with me that at this point, more and more, and me after coming back from Ukraine, seeing the issues we're facing with food production around the world as we speak, food production is going down. not in America, because Secretary Vilsack, in a way, has been ahead, and he's been incentivizing farmers to make sure that they were overproducing to cover the shortfalls America we are seeing in Ukraine and other parts of the world. But what I keep repeating is food needs to be seen as a national security issue. With better, smarter food policies, countries can do better, America can do better, but the whole world can do better. If there is food for all and we are really want to try to achieve no poverty and no hunger, food has to be obviously the main cornerstone in achieving that objective. And having people like you in government that believe in that food is hope, that food is health, and articulating the mechanisms to achieve success is going to be essential. So thank you very much, Ambassador Rice, my friend Susan, for all your years of service. I know your mom and your dad up there, they are looking at you down saying, my God, we invested good time in those conversations to shape this young, smart, amazing girl. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a leader. Thank you for being in Longer Term.
Thank you, my brother. I love you. Appreciate you so much.